My name is Diane Proctor, and this is a First Friday brought to you by the Town Government Committee meeting. This morning, we had the privilege of greeting Cory Atkins and hearing her talk with us about the nature of good government during times of crisis, because we've recently been in a time of crisis. And I just want to thank David Allen, who has chaired a committee with Vince Carlson and Ellen Quackenbush, who worked very hard to make all this possible. So welcome to a League of Women Voters First Friday. Okay, David.
Good morning from myself. And let me say specifically, welcome to a conversation about governance in Concord in times of crisis, led, of course, by our very own Cory Atkins. First Fridays often are speakers and then Q&As. This morning, we're doing something a bit different. Instead of questions which then get answers, we're going to have a conversation amongst all of us here, led, I'm so happy to say, by Cory. We noticed how that works out, that what we want to do is, after Cory gets us started into the conversation, build on what each other say from one comment to another. Some may prefer to use a chat box instead of turn on their mic. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat box and try to bring any such interventions into the conversation at an appropriate time. But if you're comfortable when you're recognized, please carry the conversation forward. Let's see if we can build as we go through it to some new insights among us. Our very own Cory Atkins simply doesn't need any introduction. If I tried, I probably wouldn't do very well. So Cory, over to you. And we're so glad. Thanks.
Thank you, David, and thank you for inviting me. This is really fun. And it's also an opportune time for me because I retired in 2019. And of course, 2020 was when the pandemic started, a good part of which I spent in solitary confinement, which is considered torture in some countries. Now I know why. And my focus has been on national politics and international politics as we fight this pandemic, and also the unbelievable happenings of the last administration. And so I have a stage in life where I'm in my 70s and I can translate what they do nationally to what that means for the towns like Concord. And it's not a pretty sight often. So that's where my focus has been. I think one of the biggest crises for governance at any level of politics, whether it's local, national, international, is the lack of good press. We don't have a newspaper in this town. We don't have a newspaper that functions in a way that gives us enough information to be guardians and participants in the governance of this community. And I was talking to a newspaper publisher last night, and he was telling me that he had published the Middlesex News back in the 80s. Disclosure here, I wrote for the Middlesex News for about 5 years. I was the female voice on their Sunday op-ed page. And I loved it. People don't pick it up as a second paper anymore. It's called Metro West. And I don't see it around town anymore. So we just have, and most people in Concord are reading the New York Times. So that's one source I can guarantee that I can have a common conversation. But Jim Hobson, who was the publisher of the Middlesex News back in the 80s, said, They were trying to consolidate because newspapers have been losing money for a couple of 2 or 3 decades now. And as technology changes and less people subscribe to newspapers. So he had got a reporter in a small town, 1 precinct town along the New Hampshire border. And the selectman came right in to visit him and said to him, we cannot govern without a newspaper. There's no way for us to communicate what we're doing with the town. And the selectman pleaded with him to cover them. Now, I know there are efforts by some to start a newspaper here, a second newspaper. And Jim gave me good guidelines on that because apparently they did this in New Bedford very successfully, a nonprofit newspaper. And they've also beefed up a local newspaper and put it in a foundation in a community south of Washington, DC, a big horse community. So there are examples. So, and right next door in Carlisle with Carlisle Mosquito of doing this on a nonprofit and a mixed paid staff and volunteer. And we certainly have the talent in town to rise to that occasion. But this is critical because if people aren't able to properly assess what's going on right outside their kitchen windows, it's hard for them to process also what's going on a national or a statewide effort. And we need that information. The paradox is we're living in a world that is flooded with information, and we don't know how to sift through it to see what is pertinent to the issue before us. And simultaneously, and I'm not saying it's the pullback from the press solely. I think this is, I'm not sure what to attribute the efforts to, but I'm just going to give you a little anecdote just to start the discussion. I served 20 years from 1999 to 2019 in the state legislature. So it's a nice chunk of time to look at what kind of participation and involvement happened or didn't happen over that time. Now, when I first ran, Speaker Finneran was the speaker, and he was really, really disliked in my district. He said he was conservative and he got the votes to be speaker by getting votes from Republicans. And his name was, just the worst, absolute worst. And yet in my 20 years of service, he was the most Democratic. And even though they called him a dictator and all kinds of names. And part of it was because it was 20 years ago when we were more democratic then. But the other part of it was his own personality. He was very passionate and fought really hard for issues. So if you fought him, he respected you. He expected that from people who cared. And you could have an eyeball to eyeball screaming match over something and then go into his office the next day, get an appointment and talk about an entirely different issue. And what people need to govern is access, transparency, accountability. And to have all of that, you need a free flow of information and ideas from different people and feedback from everybody. So I thought, in the 20 years that we thought about, I remember the first something like 25 votes that I took on the floor were against the speaker. They call that voting off. And so I went up to the majority leader and I said, look, I'm not storming the Capitol here. It's just I've been on the going door to door for 6 months. And I'm just reflecting the views of the folks in my district. And the majority leader said at the time, you know, you're okay, Cory. You know, this isn't anything we care about. We care about something, we'll let you know. You know, other than that, you're on your own. Fine. That's what I thought I was. That's what I thought I ran for. And I was happy with that. When I left, anything, any vote, any whisper against the leadership in the House was considered an attack on the leadership, and was punished. And one of the things that happened, just to give you a sense of how the dynamics changed, is right before I left, there was a big healthcare bill that we were doing. And the legislature tends to take up healthcare every decade and does some kinds of big reform. The debate was open for 12 hours on this very large piece of legislation. And even though it was open on the floor, nobody spoke. The floor was quiet. People mingled, members mingled in and out. They were in their offices going over information, meeting with people, but there was no action on the floor. There was no debate. And I had a piece of legislation up that had been bouncing between committees, and it was on concurrent surgeries. And concurrent surgeries are when surgeons do 2 and sometimes 3 surgeries at the same time. And the issue is they don't tell their patients that. So those of us who have, at my age, had a couple of surgeries and realized the only person you really talk to are your doctor and your anesthesiologist. You're not wearing anything. You're wheeled into a room basically naked. Your only advocate that you know of is your surgeon in the room, and they might not be there. And doctors were the only ones that were not required to sign in and out of an emergency room. I'm in a surgery room where everybody else was. I worked with Dennis Burke, who was fired from Mass General, and this story was picked up by the Globe Spotlight team. And after I read it, I went, oh, this is horrible. Had I known, I would have asked every surgeon that, because I've had a couple of back surgeries, are you leaving the room in the middle of the surgery? And so I was trying to get a vote on that, get it debated and get a vote. During this whole lull while the vote was open in the legislature and nobody was debating. So a good friend of mine who was a freshman rep did call for quorum so that I could get people there. And the speaker had been asking people, there were 153 amendments to the bill, and he was going one by one, telling people to remove their amendments from the bill. So when his staff came up to me and asked me, I politely said, oh, no, thank you. I'm really happy with my amendment and I would like to debate it. And having a friend call a quorum made it possible. So I debated the bill and I got a fair amount of votes. I got 50 votes, 48, 50 votes, which was extraordinary because of course the speaker voted against me. The good news is that we have other branches of the government, and Dr. Dennis Burke won a $20 million suit against Mass General. And that has had a chilling effect on doing concurrent surgeries in Boston hospitals, which was a big practice then. But it shows you how we went from debating every single line item when I was first there to nothing unless a member forced it on a major sort of decade defining bill going forward that would affect all the people in the Commonwealth. So if we're not getting democracy at the state level, and we're not getting democratic processes working at the local level, we certainly were watching democratic institutions being ripped apart at the national level. And so in the last months, I've been trying to ignore or just attribute newscasters' alarms to, our democracy has never been more in jeopardy. I've been trying to ignore that as, oh, that's alarmist, oh, we're good, our institutions finally held up. But in retrospect, we are in dire straits. And we're in dire straits in Concord for a number of reasons. First of all, we started this at the old North Bridge. We take it seriously. We have a tremendous amount of talent and interest and participation in this community. We also have the demographics, because our oldest population cohort is 65 and older. So you have more people retired who have the time to pay attention. So it really is up to us to take a leadership role here, not only in our community, but throughout the Commonwealth. So why don't I stop there and just throw that ball up in the air and see how and get some other thoughts here. Who's moderating?
I think you're moderating, Cory, so.
Oh, I'm moderating. All right. Is anybody, all right, who would like to start off the discussion?
So Cory, I'll ask, I have a question.
Yeah.
In Concord, and keeping this as a kind of a local focus for a while,
Right.
in Concord, we have struggled with trying to communicate in the absence, if you suggest, of a newspaper.
Right.
We've been struggling with how to communicate. It would be lovely to hear from people and from you to start us off on how we communicate during times of crisis when we are isolated. I mean, what are the options? What can we do? Do we need a town crier to hop on his horse and ride around town screaming to arms, to arms, to arms? Or do we need common, the old common squares where people knew they could always come in? What are some of the possible safe solutions that a town like ours might consider?
Well, there's nothing that really replaces the town square. And I think that's why people have fought so hard to keep town meetings in a place and not just by technology that people Zoom in. We're confronted, though, with a huge change in technology and also a huge change in people's habits. They do not subscribe to the local newspapers anymore. The local newspapers have slimmed down. I don't think they have a full-time reporter. And this has been a pattern over the last decade and a half because they don't have the revenues and they're just trying to make money. And so even when people send in articles with pictures, they're not using the space because they don't have the space as they try to coordinate communities. I think what we have to do, and what I want to do with high school students, is first of all, do something with our own local TV station and get the next generation involved. First of all, I think we are at such a critical point. We shouldn't do anything without having a young person do it with us, because we have to desperately train the next generation of political leadership. And it's not going to be easy given the chaos that we've been through. So this is a foggy vision at best, because I want high school kids to be involved, and I want them to come up with the vision, because they're much more familiar with the ways that people communicate now. And I'm stuck. I mean, if I handwrite anything, I still do it on a yellow pad of paper and skip every other line. I don't do that often anymore. But to set up the networks that are critical for communications. We can do this online, but it takes a certain amount of expertise. It also takes, we're lucky in this community that, I had Carlisle's superintendent of schools telling me the kids used to get annoyed at school because the computers weren't as fast as their computers at home. We can afford technology. You can't assume that everyone in other communities can. And just a side note here, we found that when we put a computer in a person's home with the kids, that's how we did it with students, giving them a computer for the year. We also changed the economics of that home because parents could use it and kids could use it. And all of a sudden it changed their whole lifestyle like it's changed ours. But we need to be more organized about this and more thoughtful and more timeline. And to get the word out on specific issues and what those issues are. Because if you've been in lockup like I have, I never thought they would ever successfully lock me up anywhere. But it took a worldwide pandemic to make it happen. So communication is the biggest need here.
Terrific.
Let me, if I could, try to build on one of those themes, the role of TV, our own TV station here in town. And notice that the fourth estate for us actually is a pair of things. Is
it what?
A pair of things. It is both newspapers and TV, the fourth estate. And we are so fortunate to have a TV station. When you consider the extraordinary investment that's involved to bring such a thing into existence. And I can report that the new station manager over there is really quite something. I think you're acquainted with Mark Pauly, Cory.
Yeah.
So
David, does this discussion, these discussions that happen on Friday morning, are they played on the local TV station for people who can't meet at 9:30 on a Friday morning?
Fortunately, yes, this is being recorded. I can report that the league has gotten extraordinarily well organized. There are whole infrastructure people behind this. The session is being recorded. It will be over on MMN pretty shortly. So yes, of course they can't.
So each Friday, because I would love to see the the Friday talks. And if I forget to tune in at 9:30, I can go pick it up on the station, on the local station later.
It's not actually the station, but it's the MMN facility that provides recordings and of many, many, many things, but certainly of the league. And this is one of the prominent things worth noting. These are first Fridays of the month. So the schedule is monthly. Here we are, the first Friday in November. So there'll be a first Friday in December and so forth going forward. And yes, indeed, when something else takes you away, you can go shortly. It'll take a little bit to get it over there, but not very long. You can go to MMN, find the recordings for the league, and there it'll be.
That's a little too many steps. No, for ordinary folks who want to know what happens. Remember, we've gone from something very tactile, like a newspaper, to clicking buttons and looking at a screen. And the publisher I was retired that I was talking to last night said, I used to go there for your bus schedule, for the menus for the schools, all different kind of local information. Well, now you go to the schools organization, you have to go down to the part of the school organization that takes care of menus or bus schedules. I mean, there's a lot of clicks and a lot of looking around involved, rather than opening a newspaper and seeing that in one quarter section, all of that information. One of the things that I think we have to do is streamline that. The State House has what they call the State House News, and that's where we should get most of our relevant news. That's the first thing I would read in the morning. And they have somebody, I don't understand particularly the arrangement here, but they sit on the floor of the chamber, which is quite extraordinary if you're not elected, and record everything that's going on. And we get access to not only sessions line by, conversation by conversation, but all the bills that are up, the people that are arguing about it. I mean, it's a really good feedback. The problem is that, and this was decades ago, when I went to find out how much it costs, the speaker pays for, the House Speaker pays for House members, but what it costs to join this if you're not a member of the House of Representatives, and it's $5,000. They sell it to lobbyists and stuff. Yeah, and it's just like, excuse me, and because people who would follow state government, especially people who are working municipal government and want to follow the issues that are, parallel, they're not going to spend $5,000 on that.
Of course not.
On that information. And it's set up in a way that, for a while, I'm always figuring out ways how to get things when I can't. I could get a former staff member to forward critical articles to me, but they managed to technically interfere with that. So, I've lost my connection, and it's just how do you formulate policy or react to it and avoid? You can't. And so we need to structure communication avenues in a very different way.
Whether we're talking, go ahead. Sorry.
Julie Rowan has put in the chat box. The Minuteman Media Network's YouTube channel can be found at. So if you all want to copy that or paste that into your own memory for your computer, it's a really terrific thing to have. And Andy has given us one for the legislature in terms of government acts. Thank you, Julie and Andy.
And we see from this, as you're bringing up the surface for us, Cory, the importance of making these things usable. The bloody technology spins forward at a pace that human beings just are not used to. You absolutely got us on point. If we think about communications in town, our fourth estate as both a combination of the TV and a newspaper, if we should get one. Time for next hands here. I see Ellen on next. I'm not going to moderate. I'm going to leave it to Cory to call on folks.
Ellen?
Put my hand down.
Quackenbush?
Sure. And I hope if folks still have the desire to talk about communication channels, I can put my question aside. Does anybody who's got their hand up want to talk about the communication channels? Because I wanted to move on to a different topic.
Why don't we stay with communications right now and come back in if you would. Thanks so much. Thanks
okay,
so much.
Robin Andrews. Bob?
Yeah, comment and question. My comment is that the first thing out of Cory's mouth when she started talking was about the lack of a local, news, paper. And if I had been asked what I thought was the major difficulty in keeping track of government in this town, I would have said the same thing. I've been, I think both Bernie and I have been very appalled by what's happened to the Concord Journal. They don't seem to have letters to the editor anymore. Some things that have been submitted to them, which are critical of what they have written, they don't print. It's very regional rather than focused on Concord. I am hopeful about the new online newspaper that seems to be on the very far advanced on the drawing board that somebody mentioned in the chat. David Ropik is taking a major hand with that, and it offers us some potential. Although I agree having something concrete that you can hold in your hands and read is somehow better for me. One of my questions is, what about the TV, the local TV? It occurs to us that we don't listen to the TV very much, uh, and I wonder how many people do. I mean, does anyone have any information about
About
how
the
many?
demographics, yeah, and the numbers, that I don't have. But this is where the technology's going. Those of you who like to hold a newspaper are in the minority now.
Yeah.
And this is streaming. The ways we communicate are streaming so fast that they're going to be on your phone. They are on your phone. And this is confusing for people in our age group because we finally get one thing down and they change it. It's just like, I go to Crosby's, they say, please don't move things, jeepers. It's like, you want to run in and run out. But anyway, what's fascinating, you go to the television station that we have, and what was once a room full of computers was reduced down to sort of the size of my dining room table here, and now is in a box kind of thing about this big. So we went from a room size technology down to something like this. And now when you pick up one of these, it's a computer. So what we need to do is also find a different way to organize information and verify it. You want your bullets from what's going on so that you can. I got totally neurotic during the pandemic, and Trump was still president. So I just thought if I didn't watch 7 hours of news and read 4 newspapers, he would do something if I were not watching. Which of course was just total self-delusion, but I was obsessing. And but I did get it, and with Trump, news was changing every hour. I mean, I have to say something was the best daytime TV I've ever seen. For those of us that, this is my baseball. So when I watch it, I understand it and I can, I've lived it. So we all have to be in the discussion about how do we best get information and absorb it, because information means nothing unless you know why it's significant. And what does it pertain to? If you say 4 people just got killed in an automobile accident. Well, how? Why? What happened? That caused the accident? Who are the 4 people? What should we do? Do we need to light it then? And just, there's all kinds of questions that a particular episode like that can create. And most of them involved government. So things have to be organized in a way that people can look at it quickly and absorb it quickly and be confident in its truthfulness, which a lot of us are just, can't figure out where, I mean, how do they get people to believe that Democrats drink the blood of babies? I mean, that is the most bizarre. I mean, what? Yes, I don't understand living in a world where people take that anywhere near seriously about a national political movement that's been, around since before the time of Lincoln, and that people would, I thought, here I've been panicking for years that we might charge a roll of stamps to the wrong account, and they have us drinking the blood of babies, and pedophiles. And it's just like, what? So, and we won't begin to understand other people from other regions if they don't have a newspaper, because we don't know what they're reading. We don't know what their problems are. Basically we get that kind of information from books and deeper studies. But what we've lost is we had a more ubiquitous way of getting news and information when we were growing up. That was pretty consistent. And now it's all over the place with wild stories on everything. We happen to be very privileged because we're a highly educated community. We're highly resourced, not just in personal affluence, but in terms of the different kinds of specialties that people are experts in. So we have a confidence that most communities don't have, and we live in an area of confidence. I see mothers in Boston that didn't know they could go into their kids' schools. And if they did go into their kids' schools, what would they do? I mean, what was their what kind of agency did they have in any kind of communication? And I wanted to match my militant moms from Concord to mothers in Roxbury and say, go get them, so that these kids can be better attended. And I was in a caucus once, and all this new research was coming down how the fate of kids in a school, the biggest determination of how that kid will do, if it will do well, or he or she will do well, is the involvement of mothers. So of course I raised my hand and said, so what are we doing for mothers? There wasn't an answer. So we're not sharing the information we have to make our community as a whole, our Commonwealth as a whole, work better. In an age where you can commute anything around the world in seconds. So we live in a cornucopia of information that we have a hard time deciphering what's relevant, what isn't, what's true and what's not. And then we live in a desert about information that's important to how we vote, and not go and vote for selectmen or school committee members or town moderators just by throwing darts at your ballot, because you don't know who these people are, because they haven't been covered. The issues that the citizens here are concerned about haven't been covered. And once we get into that world, we can't stay there because we can't govern. Elected officials might know what's going on, but unless they're out there every night talking to constituents, how are the constituents going to know what's going on? But do we have other hands up?
We have other hands up. Let me also notice that Cynthia Knock has put a couple of, we call them interventions in the chat. She and Pamela Dritt will come after this, of course. Cynthia Knock points at just what you were pointing at, Cory, the extreme problem with disinformation. She laments that on the TV news, we don't get news, but we get opinion. Of course, all of us know the differentiation between Fox News and the rest of those folks out there, and that easily 40% more of America gets its news from Fox, not news, but disinformation. I'm just trying to be clear about what Cynthia Knox conveyed to us. And she finally goes to the question of regulating social media generally, and finally gets down to how it is that instead of profit, what we depend upon is what you've been describing for us, Cory, and how the Carlisle Mosquito is a volunteer nonprofit organization.
I got two very good outlines on how other communities have done this and done it successfully. They do it online because they don't have the financing to print paper. And but it's and the New Bedford, what's it called? New Bedford.
It's the Independent. I believe it's New Bedford Independent.
And its editor, Ken Hartnett, I worked with at the Middlesex News, and he's a dime. I just adore him. So I think what we need to do, once I stumbled into this, I've been stumbling in different ways. My first reaction was, once he was let out of jail here, to get kids active in this, to get our own television, to use our own resources. First, use what we have around us. And we have plenty. We are an embarrassment of riches, quite frankly. And our students do go on to become leaders of this community and others. And so the investment we make in them in any way is, pans out to be good for any community. So that my first instinct was to get them involved and produce a show that would just be about them vetting the different issues of the week. But we need more of that. We not only do we need better communication on a local level, but on a national level and a state level. I think local and state are where we are the most deficient. Because there's plenty of national news, and you can poke around and read a bunch of different publications and see a number of television analysis. But there isn't that for the state. I don't watch any CNN anymore. Maybe I should, because that's what I used to watch on the statewide level, that and PBS when they did those shows. But we cannot be a democracy without the fourth estate. And it looks like we have to help creating a new fourth estate.
Well, Cory, you have Pamela Dritt and you have Carlin Reed. And Carlin, of course, has been instrumental in helping to keep MMN up and running. So let's try to hear from both of them and hear what they have to say.
Yeah. Okay. Carlin, you are wonderful, by the way, as chair of our committee.
Well, thank you, but I must defer to Pamela because she was here first and I'm second. Are you sure? Okay, because Pamela, my comment actually refers to what you have put into the chat about committee meetings being recorded. One thing I have found out very recently, and if Cory could help me with this, I'd appreciate that. Not all committees are recording their meetings when they hold it virtually. And for those committees, not all those recordings are kept more than 30 days, which means that if you're looking for something that's been recorded, there's a question about whether you'll be able to find it. I'm not really comfortable about this, and I'm trying to explore it further, but there's some ambiguity about how long a recorded video has to be retained, whether it's 6 months or indefinite, whether it's historically significant or not, how you tell. And more importantly to me is, when you see a posted agenda, does it say on the agenda, this meeting will be recorded and the recording will be retained, or just until the minutes are approved? So that's a slight variation on the assumption that I had until, just last week, that all committee meetings that are being held virtually are being recorded and posted on MMN. They are not.
Can I try to build on that from?
We hear from
Cory's-
Pamela first and then build on it, David?
Oh,
Is that okay?
no, that's fine. Go right ahead.
Right.
Have
yeah.
David go, okay.
Just as Cory's been pointing out, we have to take these matters in our own hands. There may be laws about how long they have to be retained, but for goodness sake, we've got a TV station, simply a matter of investment in hard drives to store this stuff. I have looked back to town meetings years ago and found them there when it was CCTV. This goes straight to what Cory has been pointing to for us, which is ourselves taking the matter in our own hands and moving it forward to what we need.
Pam?
You're
I thi-
muted.
I think this is a really important issue because you can't manage what you don't measure. And when we don't have the information to make judgments on what we have to make judgments on, then we can't make good ones. We can't govern a democracy without free information, and we don't have it anymore. We're in a data war, an information war that many people don't even realize is going on. It's almost as incredible as the idea that Democrats would drink the blood of children. When we are being fed from every corporate mainstream media outlet, focus group tested issues framing that manipulates our response, such as the one that just recently affected the election in Virginia, where the focus group tests found that voters were energized and horrified by the idea that parents could, by the schools teaching the critical race theory, which doesn't actually happen, and that parental involvement in their kids' education was an energizing issue. So they framed it to go against the Democrat, who rightly wanted censorship not to be in the school, instead of it being framed as parental involvement wasn't welcome. Parents shouldn't be. They framed his desire to avoid censorship as an attempt to make parents uninvolved, not allowed to influence the school curriculum, which is not the same thing.
And well, and we're working with
even NPR
really explosive
framed
dynamic.
it like that.
They framed it like that because the way the whole discussion has been formed
That's
about
right.
the revisionist history that's going on. And I think people on the left really blew it when they tore down statues rather than taking them down respectively and putting them in a museum someplace, because this was part of somebody's heritage, right or wrong. It should be recorded in a museum, not in a public place.
We can have reasonable discussions about things like this, but we are not on the media. It is being
It's
framed.
all screaming at each other and threatening each other's lives.
Even I cannot watch PBS anymore. Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour is so biased towards Republican talking points that and is not covering the actual demise of democracy and the climate crisis.
Well, this gets us off into a world that is less focused on our local discourse here.
Right.
So
Sorry.
that's why the Minuteman, I think, is so essential. It's
Right.
like the Concord Municipal Light Board. We actually have local control of our data, of our information, and of our energy. And we can, thank you, League of Women Voters and all of us concerned citizens, for being involved in that and spreading the word through that.
Thank you. You're right, Pamela. Where we can have local influence is so powerful. We have Cory Tari, who's
Yeah, I just saw Tari.
So go to the Minuteman.
Yep. So Cory, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that the open meeting law requires public access to meetings. So
Right.
if a meeting is on Zoom and anyone who can access Zoom or who has a phone and can call in can access the meeting, then they satisfy the open meeting law requirement. As
But
far
you
as
have to
public
know that
records
there's,
law,
you have to know that there's a meeting happening to do that. And how do we know when the meetings are happening?
well, open meeting law also requires that agendas are posted.
Oh,
Our
yeah,
official posting location is online.
okay.
And we also have meetings posted at the townhouse. I know when I started working for the town in the late 90s, there was an outdoor posting board on the mill dam that also satisfied the posting requirement.
Do they so they post online though also, right?
Yes,
Because basically if you're not posting online, you're not posting.
right.
In
That's
this in this new world. And I don't know, like on the state level, where we're being robbed of really critical information is they don't publicize committee votes and guard that. I don't know why. I always publicized as a chair. I always publicized my committee votes. I mean, I don't understand. I've never understood people who run for office who are risk adverse, conflict averse, and want to hide everything because they don't want to deal with constituents. Then don't run for office. You know? If that's not your thing, don't do it, because the only way you can have a vibrant democracy is to have it out there. Who voted for this, who didn't vote for it, and why? And what's happening on the state level, and I don't know if this pertains to the local level, because this is my first time being involved at this level, is if you don't hear the debate, you don't learn about these issues, you know, and you don't come up with the third or fourth way of doing this that involves more people's considerations. And that's where you get the best governance, is when you get the input of a lot of really good ideas. Well, if you don't even know ideas are going to be discussed, and you have 3 or 4 people who think they've come up with a solution that will satisfy everybody, even though only a small universe has been consulted, it's just not going to work in the long run. One of the things that makes this community the community that it is that people feel ownership of it. They feel part of it. And when people feel part of their government, and we've seen this over time, locally, statewide, and nationally, we have a very different response from people. Stephen, you're next.
Thank you. I had a couple of points. I'm sorry, I missed some of the conversation due to my own other side of the digital divide connectivity issues. But I think one of the issues that we have to face in getting more information out there is accepting the risk that comes with that. And what do I mean by that? We are so risk averse, and in the case of the pandemic, it makes sense, but in some other respects, we may be overly risk averse. I cannot walk into the Minuteman Media studio as I used to be able to because of restrictions on who from the public can enter a school building. You know, we are saving our children from, I don't know what, but at what cost? In terms of publishing our own local newspaper or a digital version or something that gets out, as you mentioned, Cory, filtered and organized information, there is a risk that comes with that. And the risk is that you will filter something out and someone will complain that you didn't mention their committee, or you'll state something based on what you know at the time, and without the time to pay a reporter to do a full investigation, maybe what you know is only partially hearsay. But if you put that out there at some risk, at least people will know that the subject is coming up for discussion, or the subject has risen above the background noise.
Mhm.
So I think we have to be aware of that risk exposure that could come with a more free flow of information.
And
Facebook,
not be intimidated by it. I
exactly.
mean, democracy is a messy, you know, eyeball to eyeball, sometimes confrontations, and you know, and people get very emotional about different issues, and people have to know their comfort level with, you know, at what level do they want to engage, and that the risk level is one thing we never talk about, Stephen. The other thing we never talk about is power and how power is used. And right now, power is being used to confuse us and to distort information, which makes it very hard for people in a democracy to do their part in government.
The other point I wanted to mention, follow on to Kari's discussion about notice of your question, how do I know if a meeting is happening? You could, if you wanted to, sign up on news and notices or somewhere deep in there to be notified of every single committee meeting posting. And you will get an email every time a new notice of a meeting or an agenda is posted or amended. Or I've signed up for some of my committees to be notified of when the minutes of a meeting 3 months ago were posted. So he's, finally, that June 14th meeting minutes got approved, and now it's available to see on the web, on the town's website. Again, what you need is, as you said, Cory, someone to filter that and just give the top ones. I don't really need to know about the approval of a one-day liquor license 6 months ago. I don't care. But there are other agenda items that, you know, might be interesting to more than just a few of the people on this call today.
Carrie? Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Stephen, are you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm set. Thank you.
I didn't mean to interrupt you,
That's no problem.
but I see Carrie's hand up again.
Thank you. I just want to say that, you know, with all of these meetings that are happening via Zoom, we're seeing, you know, upwards of 10 meetings being posted for a single day. And if you're interested in participating in government, how can you watch all of these meetings? So the open meeting law addresses the timeliness of minutes so that a person who did not attend the meeting can reasonably know what happened at the meeting.
Yeah,
But that doesn't need to be produced, those final minutes, until, timely is a month out or 3 meetings, whichever is later.
uh-huh.
So I think it's a challenge for the public, and I don't know what the answer is, to actually participate in all of these committees. And now,
Yeah.
having this number of committees was not an issue when people were meeting in buildings, because we're limited in how much space we have.
That's true. And we used to face the same thing in the legislature all the time. There are days when everything happens all at once. And new staff would always marvel how I figured out to be 3 places at the same time. And when we had the biotech companies in front of us talking about cloning, and I said, can you do us first? Because we have to be at a lot of meetings and events. It's very hard. I mean, the way I would handle doing like 3 different hearings is you go to one early, you stay to one in the middle, and then you go to one late. But you're not getting the full picture. And citizens aren't just sitting around in Concord waiting to go to meeting after meeting. And we have to talk about the reality of people's lives throughout the whole demographic curve, because we don't want just people who are retired and have the time just watching. How does a single mom with 2 kids who have special needs going on and is working, how does that mom make an intelligent choice on local government, any government? She doesn't have time. She's not watching the evening news. She's not reading newspapers. And we have a lot of moms like that in town. We have a lot of men who don't get home from work until 10 o'clock at night. Although they seem to get a lot of information from their phones. I asked my son how he does this. He said, I read all the time. If I'm standing in line for anything, I read. If I'm in the bathroom, I read. If I'm, sitting at a light, I read. And it's as a species, we're just being overwhelmed. And so we haven't figured out how best as the human being to process all the information that's coming at us at any particular point. And for our own needs to be able to prioritize that and evaluate that in terms of making choices in our own lives. More hands?
I'll build on our discussion just now, particularly about information from developments in our own town government, with our focus here on local. As has been emphasized now, our need is something we're going to have to take into our own hands. The question becomes, how would we improve the notice of information from the town? Cory has pointed out the flood, Stefan has pointed out the potential flood of notices. How would we see our website put together? How would we utilize social media so that we deal with these questions you pointed us at, Cory? How do we actually get information out broadly? Needless to say, the Fourth Estate, the 2 pieces of the Fourth Estate are absolutely essential to that. We're utterly lacking in one, but
We added a new position of public relations to the town, didn't we? A new position,
Aaron Stevens.
and is Erin is a woman?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Does that come under her domain of organizing information and?
She's in charge of the website and organizing information like that. You know, Cory, the league used to have, as we all know, a very active observer corps.
Right.
And people attended meetings and they would write up the, you know, what had happened. They were constrained by not being able to exercise opinion. You just had to list what happened. But at least there was an accounting of that. People have been so busy, ironically, during the pandemic, that has, the vigor of that particular operation has paled a little bit. So where there are folks on this call and others who would be willing to help step in and observe committees and just simply say, here's what they discussed, a quick distillation.
Yeah.
It would be fantastically helpful. It doesn't have to be fancy prose. Talk into your microphone, it'll misspell some things, but don't worry, and you know, distill what happened. And now where we post that or how we communicate that then becomes the next question, doesn't it? But it's going to require an army of citizens, isn't it?
Right. Right.
To cover all these
It
things.
is going to require an army of citizens with different skills and passions to get this forward. It is always required. And we are at, to me, we are going through the same kind of change, both socially, technologically, and economically, that was created by World War I and World War II. We've gone through a pandemic that shut the entire world down. I mean, those pictures on television of kangaroos jumping around Sydney, in the middle of Sydney. And the same thing here, not kangaroos, but deer. And to see a whole entire world shut down. So we're absorbing very different ways of communicating, very different ways of dressing. You know, who's put on a suit in the last, I don't know, couple of years. So, the way we eat, you know, it just has affected behaviors or community. So the way you counter that is by using our whatever opportunity we have to get together to discuss these things and to start moving on, bringing them up to the next stage of the newest stage of how do we hold the community together.
And, yeah, exactly. Brooks Reed has a question, I think, or a comment. Hi, Brooks. Good morning.
Good morning.
Brooks?
I'd turn on my video, but it's been disabled. So the comment I wanted to make was that the first time I got involved in town government is when it became relevant to me. And I think the thing that's perhaps missing now is that we need to convince people that their town government is relevant to them and it does affect them. And to the extent we can do that, people will get involved. But so long as they think it's all running smoothly and everything's fine, I think they'll go about their lives because they have other things to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not sure how you do that, but, you know, maybe, you know, take your neighbor to a town meeting day or something like that to get more people involved. But
well,
that really is.
Pam brought up a good point. How they've been doing that is setting up false dichotomies. So you have these raging debates about wearing masks in schools, or vaccinations. And we wanted our kids back in school. They were still in harm's way because the virus is, you know, still very prominent in this country. But to be screaming at each other about whether or not people should wear masks or get vaccinated doesn't promote anything that a lot of other people want to attend. And the other crisis that we have from that kind of behavior is, other than the town of Concord, I wouldn't be an election official anywhere. Because it's dangerous. They're having their lives threatened, their families' lives threatened. If the election doesn't turn out the way some people want it to. We are in a real crisis when election officials are being threatened like that. So we do have a lot to motivate us, but we need good leadership to direct and validate the information that we have available to make these decisions with.
Always comes back to leadership, doesn't it, Cory?
It
If I
does.
could,
Yeah,
Lynn
Brooks-
Escobedo, I think, has a
No,
comment.
I don't think Brooks is finished.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Brooks.
Oh, I think I'm done. Actually, I wanted to go back to one thing that Cory had said earlier about the importance of mothers and the success of children in school. We have a former Secretary of Education who lives in Concord, and he put forward that idea in the 1980s and got beaten up in the press very severely. And so it's funny, you can know what you're talking about, and unless you can convince the public of it, it doesn't do you much good.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Brooks. Linda?
Yes, thank you. My video has also been dismantled, so I'm sorry I can't see you. But
We're sorry, Linda. We're trying to figure it out technically. For some reason, lots of videos are being dismantled. We don't know what's going on. So thank you.
yeah, okay, good. I would just comment that just as an example, and I know many of you are experiencing the same thing. I had 4 or 5 consecutive meetings yesterday afternoon and evening, and some that were simultaneously meeting. Everyone approaches this differently, but in terms of trying to get citizens involved, one thing that I try to do when I go to, first of all, going to these meetings and trying to get to as many as I can is a way that I can hear citizens' comments, some of which are very emotionally based, and some of which may or may not agree with my position, but it's important for me to understand where they're coming from. So one of the things I try to do as I go at these meetings is when it is time for public comment or comment from the select board liaison, is to indicate to the public that's there when a related issue is upcoming, either on a select board agenda or another committee agenda that I'm aware of, and encourage people to attend that meeting. And that gets back to a comment that was made about how do you make it relevant for people in terms of their participation. And that's one link I'm trying to make for people, and I see others trying to do that from time to time. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments, questions, ideas?
I'll build on a phrase that we heard just a bit back, an army of
Concerned citizens, yeah.
volunteers. Was discussion about Observer Corps, and look over at Carlisle and their success with their little piece of paper, Fourth Estate, the mosquito. It really succeeds because there is an army of volunteers. And I personally would see a virtuous circle between, on the one hand, leadership, some person more than likely an individual around whom people are committed and devoted to what goes on, in this case, in the example of Carlisle, this virtuous circle between a leader and those volunteers, or let's say more broadly, the citizens, which leads to a remarkably successful little paper, which is even paper for old folks like us.
Yes, it is paper. I call it the New York Times of local papers.
And the reason why I think this is worthy of note is it tells us it's possible.
Yes.
And maybe even gives us a model. If we put together these notions of, as has come up more than once now, leadership, and then beside that, the gathering enthusiasm of a larger and larger group of people who come around that and get done these things that we've been talking about here. And of course, it would be nice if the conversation that we're having here, which is really extraordinary when you think about it, not been done so many times before, if this conversation would lead us to some insights here about how we might take things forward. But that's just one idea, Cory.
Well, one of the
Oh.
things, David, that I was thinking of poking around about this issue
Mhm.
is that, because I see this as a crisis at every level of governing. And that it's going to take the work. I mean, we started with a small band of people back in Concord a long time ago and created an experiment that no one thought we were going to be, few thought that we were going to be successful. I think we can do the same again. And we need our own version of a shot heard around the world that's going to be to revitalize democracy and get people excited. So I'm doing more research on this because I've got a retired publisher helping me and leading me to people and other examples of success that we could emulate and follow. But you're right. This is going to take democracy. You know, the fewer people you have involved in democracy, the less successful you are. So it will take a small army. Janet Miller, do you have your
Hello.
Hi.
Yes. I just wanted to elaborate on this potential newspaper in Concord, which is going to be called the Concord Independent. I attended a webinar about it. And the people involved have really looked into a number of different independent local newspapers, nonprofits around the country. And they really think that this is going to happen. It's going to start publishing next year. It will primarily be online, but they would like to have a print version for those that want it. It will be free to start off with, but they will take donations because they've got to pay for it, obviously. So I can't say I remember all the details, but it did seem really promising. And as I said, David Ropeek, who was a reporter for the Boston Globe,
Yep.
is part of this plan. Alice Kaufman is another person who was leading it. And there were other two names that people I don't know, and I don't remember their names, that were leading it. So there is hope in Concord that we will get something better than the Concord Journal, which is just dreadful, as people have said.
I know. I inquired to my publisher friend, could we buy the Concord Journal? You know, rather than creating a whole new entity, could we just buy it? Because they've done this in other communities. The problem with that is it's part of a network, and legally and technically trying to tease out one of a paper of a network they wouldn't do, the owners would not do that. But I'm excited about what I hear of the efforts going forward. I've heard some that they need $200,000, which is just really the salary these days of 2 people. And so there's some fundraising needed, and and I think David has started a 501c3 so that that can all be dealt with on a legal basis. But and maybe this will spur us to do a big event that will bring people in Concord together when it's safe to do this kind of commitment. You know, come one, come all, come to the public square, hear this, and determine what your role is going to be going forward, and being part of protecting the democratic processes that we have in this community.
And building on Brooke's observation of the pivotal making it relevant to those who might come, why does this matter to them?
Why does this matter? Do you have kids in school? Are you aging? Do you need to know what the Concord, what Council on Aging offers people? Healthcare issues and financial issues and protection fraud issues, free, and exercise, for nominal amounts of money. We have a plethora of different services in this community that not everybody's aware of, and I think the isolation of COVID exasperated that. And so, but we've got some real heroes whose stories need to be out there, who, found housing for people who were burnt out of their housing, got it furnished for them, found a secondhand car that got fixed. I mean, people are doing miraculous things, and we're not hearing about it. We're only hearing about bad stuff, which is depressing. So if we can share the best of all of us, I think this could be a lot of fun. Ellen?
Yeah, so Cory, I just love that. I think in the idea that Brooks brought up of make it relevant, that strikes me is something that's kind of like, did you know questions on a nonprofit news, frequently asked questions, like to say, hey, like, here, young mothers, this is what you need to know. Here, senior citizens like me, this is what you need to know. And did you know that these services are available to you? Like, I go on the internet all the time, and it's like the 5 things senior citizens shouldn't do. Maybe it's the 5 things young mothers should know about in Concord.
Right.
And I mean, the money's available in town. There's a lot of generous people. Look at the wonderful stuff Di Clymer and team have done for the library.
Right.
To me, it sounds like an offshoot of the library in terms of keeping people informed, involved. And I think that, like the bookstore, Concord Bookstore, they found a way to be relevant and useful locally because they bring in and have readings. They have opportunities to, at Christmas time, to have your books wrapped or to donate to Concord Children's Center. I think it's so true. I think Brooks really hit on it and David reinforced it. How do we make it relevant to people on a one-on-one basis?
Right.
And if I could add there, Cory, you pointed out things start with a small group. There's a quote from an anthropologist, and darn it, I can't bring it to my mind, but the essence of it is all major changes in the world started from a small group. And you keep committed and you build and build and build. Your idea of an event that pulls people in could be one such objective.
I think we need that. I think we need a gathering. I think we've been isolated. I live in Concord Green, which is a wonderful community and filled with my heroes. So a happy person. I also have a dog because that's a way to get to know everybody, especially during a pandemic. And we went from being on the opposite sides of roads with masks into a real community here. But just we did a silly thing, like on Halloween we had a dog parade in Austin. People came and had a good. People haven't come together to have a good time, to share ideas, to figure out what's important, what do they want to protect, what do they want to work on, and working on this stuff. To me, and I know I'm a nerd and I have a crazy sense of what's fun and what isn't, but I think it's a blast. And to be part of this community's historical arc in terms of what did you contribute to this extraordinary place that started this whole experiment for around the world in our lives, in our last couple of 100 years, which is short in human history. So let's get going and have some fun.
There's a segue here that simply can't be missed. The league have been talking about lyceums, reinvigorating lyceums. There's already one in the works, I think. And this discussion sounds like to me is pointing to a potential lyceum of just the sort that you have led us to consider. I notice we're at 11 o'clock. Diane, over to you.
Thank you so much. And Cory, thank you for such a stimulating and far-ranging and thoughtful conversation. We're so grateful for you and for your time and for your commitment to this whole enterprise. And David and Ellen Quackenbush and Vince Carlson, thank you so much for helping to get this organized and focused. Please, if you haven't joined the league, join the league.
Yes.
There have been some wonderful.
And bring a young person. Bring a young person with you everywhere.
Right.
We have an expiration date. So we just can't blithely go on thinking we're going to be here in 5 years in the same shape. Bring somebody young with you.
Laughter is the heart and soul of life, is it not? And if we can keep laughing and keep finding ways at the same time to solve the solutions, right, it really is fantastic. And Cory, you've helped us to laugh.
Oh my goodness.
And you've helped us to think, and that's just been invaluable. Thank you all for your time this morning. In December, we're going to be looking at a First Friday, we're going to be looking at the middle school building project. They're beginning to get all their numbers in, and so it will be a chance for us to hear their presentation and to listen to the various implications and of that building school, of that building on our community, the good that it will do for so many children. And the kind of strain it might put on us a little bit financially. So we have a lot to discuss as a community. So please join us in December. You can look at Monday Member News and find a way of connecting using Outreach Circle. We'll also reach out to people who may not otherwise know about this. Carlin, your whole Monday Member News, your whole Minuteman network obviously is been essential and critical in this discussion. So thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing how all of that can be incorporated given this discussion. Linda Escobedo, I also just want to say thank you, and Kari Maitari for being here, because to spend your time when this is probably now the beginning of what is a marathon day of meetings, and Kari for all your leadership. And to just remind everybody how we started, that on Saturday, there is a workshop that Kari is holding from 9:30 to 11:30 on good governance. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.